Good morning to everyone and welcome to History Matters and So Does Coffee, or actually today I'm drinking green juice because I was afraid that coffee might not make me feel well. So History Matters and So Does green juice. At any rate, welcome. Today we are going to be talking, as I mentioned, as ever, late yesterday on various social media platforms about the politics of threats and fear based on two things I saw in the news yesterday. But before we head off in that direction, I turn to my partner in crime, Annie, who will explain the rules of the game.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Annie Evans from New American History, and as I am always delighted on Fridays to be with everybody, we have a robust chat already going over here for those of you coming in through Zoom, but the best way to get your questions answered a little bit later is by putting them in the Q&A. So the chat goes really fast. We can't always keep up. So we will look to the Q&A for your questions in about 30 minutes. Yay.
Excellent. And I will also add, if you are here for the first time, please mention that in chat. Make sure that chat is set to everyone. But the History Matters community is a true community. And if you say that you are here for the first or near the first time, you will be very enthusiastically welcomed. So let us know. Okay. So our discussion of the politics of threats and fear. What inspired that? So as ever on a Thursday night, I'm like, what do I really want to discuss? And I'm sorting through things that went through my head over the course of the week that seemed as though they might be trustworthy, good things to talk about. And then I realized, because how would I not actually think about this, that I had read somewhere that there had been a discussion, and I believe this was yesterday in the House, about allowing guns into hearing and committee rooms. And I went this morning to look and see the details, and here's what I found for those of you who have not heard about it. That the House Natural Resources Committee had their first meeting, I guess, Wednesday, and a Democratic member offered an amendment that would prohibit lawmakers from carrying guns in its hearing room. And Democrat Jared Huffman of California said he was proposing the, quote, sadly necessary amendment because it's a major issue of safety for the members of our community, our committee. He noted that the Republican-controlled Rules Committee had removed a provision that Democrats had put in place for the previous two-year period, prohibiting firearms in hearing rooms and committees. So we talked very briefly about rules, right? And I don't remember now, I know I've said it somewhere on TV. I probably have said it to you, the significance of the rules set at the beginning of every session of Congress, and particularly in the House, every 2 years, the rules being set in the House. And some of that goes right beneath the radar. And here's a bit that I certainly hadn't picked up on before yesterday, which is that the new rules removed a provision Democrats put in place prohibiting firearms in hearing rooms and committee rooms. Now, Huffman added this, also significance. To be clear, members and their staff are already prohibited by law from carrying guns into the hearing rooms and conference rooms of this Capitol. Currently, under statute and Capitol Police Board regulation, members are supposed to have firearms only in their offices. But, Huffman went on to say, it certainly does seem that many around here seem to see themselves as being above those laws. Okay, so that was the number one thing was, oh, how nice that now we have, formally speaking, apart from the actual rules, but as far as the rules of the House are concerned, they actually removed a stipulation saying no firearms in hearings and committee rooms. The other thing that I noticed in the last day or so, and some of you may have noticed this as well, is that there are some members of Congress on the right who are wearing little lapel pins that are an AR-15 rifle. Don't know if you saw that. I did. George Santos is one of them. And of course, how could that not take one's attention if some members of Congress are wearing a gun where supposedly, traditionally, they put the American flag lapel pin. Okay, so those two things together, although one of them is the lifting of a rule that in a sense shouldn't have to be there because already what it's ruling against shouldn't be happening. And a lapel pin, which when asked, let's see, who is she here? Representative Anna Paulina Luna, Republican from Florida, said, the pin is about sponsoring a gun bill. She said this through her spokesperson. The person reporting this story said that it's not clear exactly what gun bill that's supporting, but at any rate, neither one of those things saying that now firearms should be allowed, whether they are officially allowed, but saying that they should be allowed in hearing and committee rooms and wearing guns on your lapel, neither of those things are normal democratic governance things that should happen. So what I wanted to talk about today was the power of those kinds of maneuvers. So as far as guns in hearing and committee rooms, they're not supposed to be there anyway, right? So one might argue, oh, well, in this case, what does that do? It's only symbolic, right? Saying, no, they should be there. Well, they're still not supposed to be there. And the same thing, like, the guns on your lapel, like really, like it's just a little threat. Well, let's talk about what that means, just a little threat. I'm a specialist in just a little threat because of the book lurking over my shoulder here. That book was about physical violence in the US Congress, but in a sense, even more than that, it was about the power of threats of violence. Over the years that I was researching that book, I found, I found a lot more than 70. I found 70 physically violent incidents in Congress, in the Capitol, over the course of a 30-year period. I found a lot more, but if I couldn't verify them to my satisfaction, I did not include them in that count. And I remember giving a lecture in front of a group of historians many moons ago, and saying that, and this one particular historian said, 70 incidents over a 30-year period, that's actually not that many physically violent incidents per Congress, is it? It's not that many. Now, on the one hand, I would say, yeah, there shouldn't really be any, but that aside, what does that mean? Like, okay, let's say that twice per Congress, there's a physically violent incident, and that you might say people in the House might, in this time period that I wrote about, think, well, something violent happened twice, but it doesn't happen that often, and probably everything is fine. That is not the way that the logic of these threats work. What matters is the credibility of the threat. The power of a threat is its credibility, is the ways in which people hearing that threat believe that it might come true. If you believe that violence may be acted, if someone may be violent against you, you're going to monitor your actions. You're going to self-censor. You're going to not stand up in some cases where you might stand up and object. You are going to watch your words and your actions. You may not say that you're doing that. You may not even acknowledge or admit that you're doing that if someone asks. But the fact of the matter is, that's the power of credible threats. Their power is not in whether or not they're enacted. It's in whether or not people believe they can be enacted, right? That there's a threat of violence. And any of us, right? Any person who truly believed that if they said or did something, there might be some scary physical violence taken against them, we would all think twice. Even if we decided, to be brave and stand up to it, we would think twice. And it's in the thinking twice that you get people potentially self-silencing, sitting down, shutting up, and doing whatever they feel needs to be done so that they won't get hurt and that they can go along to whatever degree they can doing their job. So in the period that I looked at in my book, the 1830s through the 1850s, Southerners used credible threats more than anything else. They were violent, and I talk about the violence, but far more common than that were these credible threats. And because people knew that they might that violence might be taken against them, they sat down and they shut up. I didn't have time this morning to look for the specific quote, but Joshua Giddings of Ohio, when he first gets to Congress, writes in his, I believe it's in his diary, he's a little stunned at, I think he calls them our northern friends, because they're afraid to stand up and say something against Southerners. And apparently there was a Southerner who was demanding a per diem payment for travel that he hadn't made or something. He was demanding payment for something he didn't deserve payment for. And Giddings, was basically saying to himself, that's ludicrous. Like, what? He's basically just saying, give me money for no reason. And no one is standing up. And when he asked people why no one was standing up, they essentially said some version of, well, he's a fighting man, so I'm not standing up. Now, notably, one of the things that I discovered early in working on that book is that members of Congress, when they looked at a new Congress coming in their mind, and sometimes happily for me on paper, they sorted through the people who were going to be in that Congress and divided them into, and these were their words, fighting men and non-combatants, right? Their terms. So in the diary of Benjamin Brown French, who was a main source for the book, and he's a clerk in the House, he would indicate in his diary, so-and-so is a non-combatant, so-and-so is a fighting man. First of all, think of that mindset. A new Congress comes in and you look around the room and you're like, basically, who here is violent? I need to know that. That's what these people were doing. If that's your mindset, then yeah, you're going to be very careful about what you do or what you say to the people who already you're thinking might be violent. And indeed, some people came to Congress advertising the fact that they were willing to be violent, basically saying, yeah. And there were others who said so-and-so came to Washington, prepared to be a fighting man and prove himself that way and earn fame that way. So this wasn't something sneaky, right? This is something that people are like, yeah, I'm a fighting man and I'm going to have power because of it. It made me, actually, I forgot to mention this and I should have. Another thing that I noticed in the last week, which just popped into my mind, as you will see for obvious reasons, is that Kevin McCarthy at some point said, and I did not double check this morning, so one of you brilliant Googlers will have to do this, but I read at some point in the last week, he said that he was happy to have Marjorie Taylor Greene on his side, but the way he put it was, she's the person you want next to you in the trenches. She will fight until the fight is done. She will never give up. So he literally said, basically, she's a good combat veteran, was the way he described her. Now, this immediately called to mind some actual verbatim quotes from that book, like Henry Wise of Virginia, who says, I believe in the early 1840s that what he needs to be a good congressman is a trusty weapon and a trusty friend to fight by his side. All of these, add that onto the list. We now have 3 ways in which the Republicans, who now have a slim majority in the House, are signaling that they're boasting even about their willingness to be violent. In the period that I wrote about, it had an impact. As I mentioned before, Joshua Giddings talks in his diary about how people are afraid to stand up and object to things or say things because they're afraid of the repercussions. There's a whole chapter in that book on an incident in which Jonathan Silly of Maine stands up and says something about the Democratic Party, I believe, being corrupt. Correct on that? Jonathan Silly was the Whigs. At any rate, let me put this back. Jonathan Silly stands up and says an entire party is corrupt. I'm still like not enough green juice in my brain yet. And Henry Wise stands up and says, oh, you're declaring everyone in that party is corrupt. And he very dramatically turns like almost a stage turn and looks at Silly and says, are you saying that I'm corrupt? And of course, that's immediately moves onto threat territory, right? anyone in that room would know, as your friendly historian Joanne Freeman knew, that's like, are we going to head into dual territory now? Like, are you insulting me personally? Is that what you intend to do, Mr. Silly? And Silly, of course, well realizes what this means and backpedals very quickly. Oh, no, I didn't mean it personally. I was, whatever it is he says, he backs away from it. That's the sort of thing that I'm talking about this morning when I'm talking about fear of threats. Awareness that threats might be carried out is the real power in that kind of a regime by force. So it worked. It worked for several decades until, and I know I've talked about this before, until the 1850s, with the rise of a very different, but still Republican Party in the 1850s, not the current day Republican Party. As far as how parties change over time dramatically, I will probably have to do that on another episode. Store that away as something to come back to. Today's Republicans are not eternal Republicans. But at any rate, the Republican Party, when they rose to power in the mid-1850s, began electing people to Congress. They, rhetorically speaking, their campaign rhetoric said that they were going to fight the slave power. And in Congress, that had a literal edge to it, that if necessary, they were going to fight physically the slave power in Congress if required. And some of them came to Washington with weapons. Many of them, if there was an episode in which someone tried to bully them into silence or submission, they would stand up, and I have multiple examples in that book. They would stand up in front of that, the word they used at the time was bully, which I tried to not use in the title of today's episode, because I think it on the one hand, it makes us think of school, and thus somehow or other, I think for some people takes away the threat of it when it shouldn't. So I avoided, but that was the word that they used, bullies. Bully Brooks, who caned Charles Sumner, that was what they called him. So these Republicans would stand up in front of these men who are known to be bullies, and they would say very assertively, oh no, we're not the Northerners who were here before. We're a different kind of Northerner. We're not Northerners who are going to sit down and be silent. We're Northerners who are going to stand up. We're Northerners who are willing to fight. Again and again and again, that refrain among key members of this new party, this new Republican Party, different kind of Northerner, different kind of Northerner. Don't do what you've done before. We're not just going to sit down. So they ran on that in their rhetoric, but in Congress, they actually gave form to that. Sometimes that led to dangerous actions or potential fights or near fights or actual fights or the threat of duels or anything else. So sometimes that risk entailed something bad coming after it. But for many instances and for a while, the Southerners didn't initially respond because they were a little bit stunned, right? So for a very long time, and initially in the 1830s, Southerners in each party used those sorts of threats to attack people in the other party, Northerners in the other party. Then, of course, over time, those threats were totally centered around silencing anything having to do with slavery at all. Southerners were initially a bit taken aback at the fact that now there's a new kind of Northerner in Congress who's willing to stand up to the threats. And in the case of at least one senator, had a gun and put it down on his desk, basically saying, okay, here I am, bring it on, because I'm not the same kind of Northerner who's here before. Now, this is not what we want to happen in Congress, but what's noteworthy is, at least for a time, that kind of behavior took Southerners aback, highlighted that problem to the nation, and Northerners noticed it and responded. And so there, again, it's all there in the book somewhere. A lot of Northerners in Congress got letters from constituents saying in one way or another, at last there's a North. Finally, there's a North. You guys are standing up. Yes, this is good. This is excellent. There was a wild wave of enthusiasm for this. Now, of course, that's 1855 or ish, when the Republican Party is first coming to Congress. 1856 is the caning of Charles Sumner. So now we have a act of extreme violence taken against a Massachusetts senator, a known abolitionist Massachusetts senator. That, of course, raises tempers in the North, but it would be hard to exaggerate the emotional impact that had on Northerners who, on the one hand, had been so emotionally swept up into this moment when Northerners were standing up, and then right in front of them had one of their members of Congress literally beaten to the ground for having, in one way or another, done that, right? So when you read the letters that people wrote to Sumner or to other Northern congressmen, I almost can't do it justice by paraphrasing it as I normally do. These people are, they're outraged, but they're stricken. You know, they are, they're all but sobbing on the page, right? That this happened, that they saw this happen, that their member of Congress was beaten to the ground by a Southerner. I don't know how we would respond today to that. It would be an interesting thought experiment, I suppose, not one I would be very eager to undertake. But in this time period, it had an impact. And of course, you know, as I was writing my notes out this morning, it's like, okay, so the Republicans came and they stood up to the bullies, and that was good because it took Southerners aback. But then, of course, what you ultimately have is more violence and an increasing inability of Congress to do very much at all. So I'm actually not suggesting, maybe 2-3 years ago, a couple of years ago, I was asked to engage in a conversation with a congressional committee, and they wanted to know what my suggestion was about what to do for a Congress in which people can't even really speak to each other civilly. And you know, I could talk about what happened. They wanted me to talk about what happened in the mid-19th century, but my comment had to be, on the one hand, X, Y, and Z happened. On the other hand, it got more violent, right? So I'm not saying, like, yeah, like this is excellent, like bring your gun and, you know, throw back what is being thrown at you. That's actually not what I'm saying. However, a couple things I am saying here. I think the sense that people had in the letters that they were writing saying, you know, at last there's a North, at last you're standing up. Even a senior historian friend who read a draft of my book, I remember he had a personal response. He was like, I got to the last chapter and I thought, finally, they're standing up. Like he couldn't believe these Northerners were just taking this all. I understand that emotional response. And interestingly, some of what we see now, Hakeem Jeffries particularly, really effective at standing up and making statements. This is unacceptable. This is undemocratic. This is what they're doing, and we see it, and you should see it too, and is getting cheered for just standing up and stating facts. This is happening. Don't turn away from the fact that this is happening. And here's what it's intended to do. Here's what it's intended to be. I think standing up and highlighting what's happening, stating what's happening, exposing what's happening for what it is, not just attacking for the sake of attacking, not slashing back at members of Congress, slashing at you, but literally standing up and exposing the fact that this is happening. Here is what this person is trying to do on the floor of the House or the floor of the Senate. Here is why they are doing it. They're going to deny it up and down. And what other reason might they have for doing this thing? And they'll come up with reasons. Of course, they always come up with reasons. But the fact of the matter is not commenting on it and not sort of allowing it to go beneath the radar because no one's doing anything and it's just language and it's just threats and there isn't actual physical violence. We've talked about this many, many times on History Matters. We don't want to normalize that kind of nonsense. We don't want that to come to seem to people who are not like fully aware in this moment, to seem as though it's just become a sort of norm of how our government works. It's not. It's not a democratic norm. If people are threatening violence, it's not a democratic norm. If they're saying it should be perfectly allowable for guns to be everywhere, I know it's your stand, the NRA, guns are great, whatever else, it is not normal for people to say in our building in the capital of the United States, in the capital of the United States, guns should be everywhere. And we're going to explicitly signal, not just to other members of Congress, but to the nation, guns should be everywhere. And even here in Congress, we want them everywhere. That's signaling, we've talked before about some on the right out in the world, threatening members of school boards and threatening people who work on the voting process. We've talked about that a lot. But when we look at people who are in power in the national legislature, who in one way or another are edging around that kind of broad threatening language or those broad threatening implications, that has kind of a double whammy attached to it. It's not just it's saying two things. It's saying to the nation, yeah, actually, we support this. We support what we're telling you. We support weapons everywhere. We support this kind of appearance. We support this kind of behavior. We support this to the nation and to members of Congress. It's a statement to members of Congress about, what they can expect. Not meaning that anything will be carried out necessarily that's violent, but it's a statement about, and it's going to shape the nature, the tone of things happening in Congress. So, I think it's important for people like AOC or Hakeem Jeffries to stand up and say, this is what this is. This is what this is. I don't know if you saw AOC's comment, I think again from yesterday, if you haven't, go find it, on attacks on women of color in the House. Boy, she let it rip. And even banged the podium with her notes as she walked away. We need people to do that. And if you go on social media, you will inevitably see people saying, yeah, like that's how I heard about AOC, right? Is because it was flowing all over social media with people saying, finally, someone is saying what needs to be said. That's part of my message today. I always try and, in my comments sort of loop back around at the end to what we should do. That's one thing we should do, is stand up, expose it, talk about it for what it is, encourage our leaders and our representatives to do the same, because that's important. Because if we don't, it just becomes a norm. It just becomes another norm, and it isn't. It's not a norm of any kind of democratic governance. It's a norm of a reign of violence. It's a norm of, and I have some definitions here before I conclude, I know I'm a little long. It's a norm of, for example, authoritarian rule. Authoritarianism, here's the definition, denotes any political system that concentrates power in the hands of a leader or a small elite that is not constitutionally responsible to the body of the people. Right? So authoritarianism wants blind submission of citizens to authorities that they have no control over. Totalitarianism, one more click on that, what do you want to call it, spectrum of bad, seeks power over everything, right? Total control of the lives of individuals. They seek power beyond governmental rule. But both of those things, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, threats of violence, are a way in which you can get that kind of power. Because, again, how many of us very logically would pause if that's the climate that we're living in? We might choose to do something to oppose it, but we're going to think carefully about how we do. We are in a moment still where we can stand up and speak about it, where others can stand up and speak about it, where people can point at it and expose it and talk about the implications. Doesn't need to be screaming and ranting, needs to be clear, grounded in evidence, and you know, in a sense, when I am on Twitter, I try very hard not to be emotional, because then people attack the emotion and you actually hurt your message. I think calmly exposing what's going on and stating what it is for what it is, I think that's important, and perhaps more important now than ever, because it's one of very few ways in which we can stop that kind of behavior from simply becoming part of the hum of our political process. And it's not the hum of any democratic political process. So that's really the comments that I wanted to offer today, was to acknowledge, to cheer on the people who are standing up and saying that's not acceptable, to offer some of that on your own. As ever, you know, call your members of Congress and tell them, you know, I know that seems ridiculously useless, right? Oh yeah, I'm gonna, particularly if your member of Congress is someone who talks like that, right? But it is important, I think, still to register the degree of public dissent, public displeasure, and thus public power over a response to an action. I know I'm not going to talk about this today, but we just saw the African American history class that was proposed and that Florida resisted. There was a strong resistance in Florida to that, and now, and I don't have the details of how things were pared away from it, but there were a lot of things that were removed from that proposed class. The Black Lives Matter movement, Black feminism, any number of things that are just part of American history as well as part of African American history, and now they no longer exist in that class. But there's a case in which loud public outcry had an impact. That's possible on all sides. So I, as ever, encourage people not to lose hope, not to stand back, not to assume things are inevitable. I'm going to offer you guys who haven't gotten bingo yet, bingo for you, to remember that everything is contingent. There's contingency. We can change outcomes. We can change outcomes beginning now. And that's so important to remember. It's so important not to surrender by assuming things are a done deal. They aren't. That's just what people want you to think. So be willing to stand up and voice what you feel is right, to stand up and speak for it, to stand up and point fingers at what you think is wrong, and to highlight how democracy should really work and things that are very obviously not democratic. Okay, I'm going to stop. I'm going into our Q&A time. And I even beat the mug.
They had mug a few minutes ago.
Oh, okay. I missed the mug. I was like,
there's a very active chat going on today in many directions.
That's right. Tom's like, you beat nothing. I love you.
Oh my gosh, Tom.
Now this is a censored mug.
Oh,
I haven't used it in a while, and it's about writing, but you'll get the way in which it relates to what I'm talking about today. It says, "Write like a mother." Boo!
It said this is a censored mug. I was like, how do you censor a mug? And now I see you just slap a stick.
I censored the mug. So you don't just write like a mother, boop, you speak up like a mother, boop, right? This is not a time for self-censoring. It gets really little. The bad part is, but anyway.
That is so funny, because a friend of mine gave me a bracelet for my birthday, and it just looks like a plain silver bracelet. On the inside, it says, keep beep going. And I wore it yesterday at the Board of Education meeting because we were testifying. It didn't work. They still did what they were going to do, but we were testifying, and she was there also speaking. And there were like 5 of us. She had sent it to a bunch of us. All had the same bracelet on, like solidarity. We felt like a girl group. It was
that's excellent. Well, this is yet another.
That's a great mug. Where'd you get that mug? Did one of us send it to you?
No, I think this is one that I bought myself, I believe. And that would have been where I got it a long time ago.
Okay.
So
I've never seen that.
No,
Reese is getting us the link right now.
Of course. Okay. Because this is
Reese is here during tax season, y'all. She gets like a major applause. This is her busiest time of year. Dear Sugar. I don't know that website, but I'm going to look. Thanks.
I think if I remember correctly, I might get this wrong. We can do it during the after party. I think she had a kind of sassy advice column, and there was a play at the Public Theater based on her advice column, which is probably where I came to hear about her.
Okay.
We can do that in the after party. Okay.
Reese is putting her whole bio in there for us.
Oh, look at that. Reese is like, yes. Okay.
She's on it today, y'all. She's doing the
Man.
bingo card. She's looking up links. Wow.
Okay.
We've got lots of great questions. So tell me if you're ready. All right. Dale, our good friend Dale writes, if firearms are allowed in committee and hearing rooms for legislators, does that mean the same rule applies to the gallery? Is there a historical precedent for that?
Well, weapons aren't supposed to be in the gallery. Weapons aren't supposed to be on the floor. But the difference between committee hearings and committee rooms where they're talking about members of Congress is that members of Congress believe they're above the rules. Whereas if you're in the gallery, you're just an average American like the rest of us. So it'll be easier for you to be denied that, which is part of the problem here, is that we have a population of people who just assume they're above the rules. And until someone tells them they aren't, they are above the rules. But I will say, and I didn't say this in my comments, and I suppose I should have, one of the things that I talk about in the book is the committee rooms were particularly dangerous because the press wasn't allowed in committee rooms. And so I can't remember, deep, dark dungeons. People in one or another way said committee rooms were scary places because anything could happen in a committee room and there was nothing to stop it. And there is one instance in which there's someone who's testifying before a committee, a witness testifying before a committee. And actually Henry Wise's trusty friend is offended and reaches for his gun in this committee room. And there's like a scuffle. So guns were potentially brought to committee rooms, and more than once, they actually shaped what came out of that committee room. There are examples in the book of people who decide to shut up and not say anything, or people who say, I'm not opening the door until this committee agrees on X, Y, and Z, and they're armed. So.
All right. The next one comes from Dave. He says, threats of violence are troubling, but would you agree states have felony laws in place banning books has already had the intended effect of bullying library staff to empty the books out of the library? How does a local library stand up to that sort of bullying?
Absolutely. And that's a perfect example of precisely what I'm talking about. It's the threat of the kind of severe punishment that might be inflicted on you for having, heaven forbid, a book that someone doesn't like on your shelves that absolutely has the same impact. That people are going to stop bringing books, they're going to cover books, they're going to keep books out. And of course, part of this is making it hard for people to tell which books are allowable or not allowable, which will motivate people to censor, keep out any and all books out of fear of what might happen. That's the same mechanism. That's the same emotional power of emotion control, right? Of using threats as a way to get compliance. And that's absolutely the same thing. And, in that case, we do have, is it the Brooklyn Public Library that is offering access to students who are being denied books? I mean, I think that's wonderful. It is one library, I suppose in a way, what we need is more people who are willing to step up and offer access to books. But as far, which is a great runaround for what's going on in places like Florida. But obviously, there's another case in which we can't just let it sort of happen there in Florida, in a state where it can happen because of gerrymandering and any number of other things. We need to talk about it. We need to address it. We need to highlight it. We need to, as a group, we need to find group ways to point to these things. Of course, we should individually speak up, but I think organizing, and I've talked about this before, I know at this point, we've been doing this for so long, I can just say automatically, we've talked about this before, but we have that the power of a huge political power comes from the bottom up, comes from people organizing and finding ways to make clear, this is not fair. We don't like this. We want this. And that kind of power of public opinion and joined public action and public organization, it can be huge. It can be huge. And I think we underestimate that all the time.
Yeah, I know that there was a teacher, and I can't remember, someone will find the link, a teacher was fired for sharing that Brooklyn Public Library link with her students because she's in a state with a divisive concepts law. That happened a few months ago, but I know last week when DeSantis started making the teachers cover all their bookshelves or remove all the books from the classroom, people were sharing that Brooklyn Library link very widely. But as I said, there was a teacher fired in another state earlier.
Right. That only has to happen
She
once.
put the link on the board and she got fired.
That only has to happen once for people to be afraid to do it. It's logical. Any of us would be.
Yep. Intimidation and threats, picking on our teachers. The other thing we were talking about in the chat while you were speaking was what that message sends to students. You know, dress codes at school, you can't have t-shirts or anything representing guns or violence. And then they turn around and see their national leaders doing that.
Right. Right.
So
Well,
how
that's
do you
exactly.
punish a student, you know, for breaking the dress code. And then they're going to turn around and say, well, my congresswoman or my congressman's doing it, right?
Exactly. That kind of behavior is multi-level. It has a huge audience, and it's has the added audience of people in Congress. But yeah, these are people who are representatives of Americans making very loud statements by what they're doing. And yeah, why, you know, by definition, by doing that, people are going to be able to point to that and say, well, that's my member of Congress. A lot of people supported that person. We put that person there. So obviously, like, that's acceptable.
Yeah, it was Oklahoma. Thank you. I knew they'd find the link. They're so great. Yeah,
Totally.
just breaks my heart. Okay. Carol Lee has a question. So of course her question goes right to the top. Okay, it says, how could or should the 2023 Democrats appropriately and effectively stand up to the AR-15 pin-wearing Republicans?
I mean, I always agonize because particularly if I'm asked to like be on some TV program and I'm asked, so what's the solution, Joanne? You know, like congressional committee. So what should we do? And I wish I knew the solution, and I don't. I would say, wouldn't it be wonderful if Democratic members of Congress started wearing a book pin on their lapels?
Oh, I love that. Let's make that go viral. If everybody here in the chat retweets that and sends a link to a book pin somewhere.
Someone, you guys find a pin that's really.
I want if the money goes to a public library or a school library,
Exactly.
the ALA or something.
And so we can have one group wearing.
I'll help that go viral. I'll put it on New American History. I'll put it on Bunk. I'll put it everywhere. Yeah, ALA library already has it.
Okay,
yes.
Okay, that's
all right. We all need to order a pin, and then we all need to tweet it out. The link.
We all need to go out. I will go on I am now on 4, 5. I don't know how many different social media platforms I'm on, but I will blast it out.
Oh, I love that. All right, we're going to organize this in the after party. Thank you, Carol Lee. Yes. Okay, so here's one from our friend Tim, who is the link master of History Matters. Tim says, my representative, Dean Phillips, Minnesota District 3, made a strong statement yesterday in support of Ilhan Omar, Minnesota 5. I'm wondering what you thought of the rhetoric leading up to the vote to remove her from the Foreign Affairs Committee.
Well, I mean, so you actually will have to inform me about the rhetoric since I didn't tune it in. I just looked at the fact of that it was happening and AOC's response to the fact that it was happening. My understanding is, and you guys can correct me, is that they were pointing to the fact that she's anti-Semitic. She's anti-Semitic, so she shouldn't be on that committee. I think, first of all, I can't say that I have her targeted as this horrible anti-Semitic person, but I also think you can't be you can't be a party that happily includes a lot of anti-Semites and then pretend like you're suddenly bothered by it. So to me, I think she has every right to stay on that committee. She's one person among many. I don't think that we think she's anti-Semitic and thus she must go, unless you're going to enforce that over anyone who's on any committee and talk about how their private beliefs might influence what they do in a negative way. I don't know. That's just a random, it feels like a random excuse rather than a thoughtfully thought out actual reason. I guess that's my response.
All right, thank you, Tim. Here is one from Kathleen V. Our friend Kathleen asks, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis on Tuesday announced plans to block state colleges from having programs on diversity, equity, inclusion, and critical race theory. This seems to take educational decisions away from educators into the hands of political appointees. How independent have educators actually been in past history? Has this ever been done to the extent in our history?
Well, wow, if we were talking about this next week, I would have so much more information. Next week, I am taking part in the dissertation defense of a student, not my student, but I'm on her committee, and she has been writing about education and classrooms being used as places to enforce this kind of behavior. So the short answer, before I've finished reading her dissertation, is yeah, this has happened a lot, where people use classrooms to clamp down and enforce and prevent and pass laws and declare things out of bounds, because classrooms have always been seen as, I don't want to even just say laboratories for the future, as laboratories for the future, statements about what's accepted and what isn't, and breeding grounds for what people want to come. So there, I mean, so many here are educators. We all know the power of classrooms, right? For good. But that same power can be perverted in all kinds of bad ways. Is the most obvious thing in the world to say. But it's precisely because classrooms are such a source of power in what we give to children, what we give to the next generation, through them, what we give to the nation, what we deem to be the acceptable range of exploratory thought and learning, and encouraging people to think broadly and to think inclusively, and all of those things that are a huge part of civic education, civic awareness. If you're in a democratic nation, we all know how classrooms are places where you breed that sort of thing. I will also say that the fact that students in Florida are being deprived of books, this is an obvious thing to say, but it just breaks my heart, because as a kid, let's just say that there were some less than pleasant circumstances sometimes in my youth, and books were the escape, man. Books were it. Books were the place you could go, and you could go anywhere in a book, and shaped my sense of me, shaped my sense of what was possible. But and the fact that that's being taken away from children, I won't even put that to words, but yeah,
that's having a hard time on that one myself. Okay, so the next one comes from Dave. He says, what are Dr. Freeman's thoughts on Trump's posts on Truth Social about his 80 million followers being angry they were locked and loaded? What is an effective pushback to that sort of rhetoric?
Yeah, so I will admit that when I saw people screaming about it yesterday on social media, I did not watch it or tweet about it, because I knew precisely what it was going to say, and I needed to decide what I wanted to say. I did see people saying this isn't even masked fascism, it's just fascism. I think I know I've heard people talk before about what they call a truth sandwich when they confront idiocy like this. So you don't just say, he just said this thing. All that's doing is spreading it, right? So that you if you're going to attack that kind of thing or talk about that kind of thing, you always need to sandwich it in the truth, which is, here is how democracies work. Here's the person who's basically just saying, we're going to shoot our way into getting power. This is not how democracies work. So I don't think we should be giving Trump, we shouldn't be promoting him or promoting his message, but we can certainly confront that kind of commentary without repeating it, without retweeting it. And we need to do that. I mean, I've been talking about this for a long time, right? We need to be talking about what democracy actually is, and not allowing other people to end that conversation by saying, we're not a democracy. Like, shut up. It's like, we're a democratic republic. I've had this long conversation with people where they're like, we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic. I'm like, okay, what kind of government does the Constitution create? Silence. A democratic republic. So we have a democratic mode of governance in our country. We do. And as everyone here knows, boy, that's what got me, I've said this before too, that's what got me on Twitter in the first place, was my growing awareness of the degree to which people really fundamentally didn't understand, just generally out in the world, how the government worked, three branches of government, checks and balances, what democracy is. As many of us as can go out there and in very calm, informed, and supported by evidence terms, keep explaining these things and not respond to the trolls who inevitably push back. That's important. I continue to believe that that's important.
Absolutely. Okay, our good friend Cece writes, this might be a silly question. I love Cece because she always puts these hilarious disclaimers on her questions. This might be a silly question. I have not managed to finish Field of Blood because I had to return to the library. Oh no. But when Sumner was getting beat, did no one rush to stop the person and take his cane away? The more important question, any sense of how long it took before violence in Congress was frowned upon or rules were made to prevent it?
Okay, so as far as anyone trying to break it up, complicated answer. So there was a long tradition before that point that if there's a beating going on of someone saying you've offended me, sometimes people would stand back because they would say it was a fair fight, particularly with reporters. If a reporter said something that offended a congressman and the congressman went to beat the reporter, people tended to stand back and say, well, it's a fair fight, it's a fair fight. And if it's not a fair fight, they would intervene. In this case, there were people who tried to intervene, but Brooks had friends there who were keeping people away. And then there were others who were just not going to intervene because this was seen as a matter between two men. I was going to say two gentlemen, but maybe one of them wasn't. But at any rate, so there were people who wanted to intervene. They were held off, and then some people just didn't interrupt. They just, stop, and didn't really do very much. And it stopped when Brooks's cane broke. So it was just allowed to continue on. As far as how long it took for violence to stop in Congress, that's right, fair fight, yikes, absolutely, Cece. I can't say, as of 1867, January 4th, I can't give you a date like that, but what I can say is with the Civil War breaking out and Southerners leaving Congress and then having to basically ask their way back into the Union, that was a really interesting period when some of them tried to come back violence intact, and Northerners at that moment essentially in one way or another said, yeah, you really think we're going to let you back in if you don't go back to that kind of behavior? Because we won't. There was an episode in the Capitol in which it was very close to the Sumner incident of someone attacking someone else, not in the House or Senate, but in the hallways. And Northerners stood up, I believe this was in the Senate, and said, I'm trying to remember who this was. His name went right out of my head, Massachusetts Congressman, begins with a T, Thaddeus Stevens. I believe it's Thaddeus Stevens who stood up and said to people in the room, okay, I bet a lot of you here don't remember what it was like here in the 1850s, but I do. And I remember what it felt like to be here in this, he calls it, instead of hall of legislation, he calls it a hell of legislation. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to let them back in if they're bringing that with them. Should we? And the Southerners are no longer in a position of power. That changed things a lot. But, as I argue in the book, a lot of that violence went from national corridors to state level violence to suppress, Reconstruction on a state level instead of just on a national level. So it's not that the violence went away, but it was restructured.
Yeah. And now with social media, it's like a different form of violence. You don't have to have a gun to be violent.
That's true.
Yeah. All right. We've got two more. I think we can do it. Another one from Dale. It says, what was the violent situation in Congress during the Civil War itself?
Okay, repeat the question for me.
He asked, what was the violent situation in Congress during the actual Civil War period?
Oh, well, it wasn't there. I mean, there was, let me add a little bit of subtlety there. Pretty much there wasn't that kind of physical violence once the Southerners left. But interestingly, one of the arguments made for why the threat of duels was important in Congress was that it kept people, it made them careful for their words, because they knew if they spoke the wrong words in the wrong way, they might be challenged to a duel, which sounds a little bonkers as a, way of controlling Congress. However, when the Southerners left and dueling left, the level of nasty commentary and personal attacks, it rose. So in some way, I suppose if you think you're going to get shot for what you say, you are going to be more careful about what you say. But it became much, much less violent. I'm trying to think if I found any violent incidents during the Civil War. And the fact that I'm not sure tells you pretty much there was not a lot. I think the first return violence was when maybe it's Louisiana, when the states started to try and ask their way back into the Union, and they brought it back. They tried to bring it back with them.
All right. And we actually did all the questions because I had just forgotten to click off of one that we did. So we did it. And it's exactly 11. Like exactly.
Woohoo. Okay.
Awesome.
Excellent. Well, that is, I can't quite believe we did that. Okay. So several things as we are about to, I know, yay, team is right, Carolee, as we head into the after party. First off, as ever, thank you guys for coming and being here and engaging in the sometimes profanity-laced conversation of democracy, as ever, and we will continue on to keep doing it, as important as it is. And particularly when we have people trying to silence other people and trying to remove words and prevent children from seeing books and words, we need to be that much louder with the words and the thoughts and the ideas that we know need to be out there in the world circulating, so people can actually think things through for themselves and understand things and ask questions and do all of the things that seemingly are trying to be stamped out by some states over some school districts, some educational systems in this country. I don't know, you guys are like, a lot of talking on over there. I do want to thank you for being here. I do, as I've said before too, I know you guys have said how important this is to you, and it has become extremely important to me, to the point that if it wasn't important to me, I might have like begged off this morning, but there was no way I was not going to be here. And even last night, I was like, wow, I'm not doing well. Miss an episode. I will never miss an episode. Excuse me. At any rate, I hope that everyone will have a wonderful, wonderful week. And John and Annie, as ever, thank you so much for being here and for making this possible, for being part of the community and the team. And I will say, last but not least, I think that the idea of getting Democratic members of Congress to wear book lapel pins, if we can actually find, like, best of all would be if we found and settled on one that we thought was the best, and put that all over social media and told our members of Congress. Wouldn't that be something?
So Carolee's already arranged a subcommittee over on Slack, I think. We're going to look for one.
Okay.
Like, we found one we like, but it goes to a for-profit. And I was hoping to find one that goes to pay for putting books in the hands of kids, like, or paying a teacher's legal fees that got fired for sharing books with kids, something like that.
The ALA, maybe?
Yeah, that's what we're looking at. But they don't have a pin. I couldn't find a pin. They have T-shirts and other things.
New York Public Library?
We'll look, we'll keep looking,
Okay.
but we're going to look today, and before the end of business, I think we'll find one, and then we'll send it to you through Twitter, and we'll like blast it out to everybody. Yeah, there's no.
Once you tell me about it, and I'll peek around a little too. Once you tell me about it, I will blast it everywhere.
Everybody look, everybody who's on the chat, look. And if you're not on our Slack channel, Reese is here today. If you put Slack in all caps and your name and your Gmail, we prefer Gmail, but any email, you can get added to Slack. Maybe we should start a new thread, Carolee, that says like book pin or something, so everybody knows where to look. All right.
Okay, I
You're
see
on.
all this going on. I'm saving this
Oh, New
because
York Public Library, do they have a pin, CC? Look and see if they have a pin. Oh, ACLU has one. That's good. We like
okay, we just need to see what it looks like. It has to be really obvious, like the
Yes.
rifle is so.
It is. It says,
obvious.
I read banned books, ACLU. Okay, keep looking. I like that one.
Even if it was just an obvious image of a book.
It is. It's a book and it has little flames coming out of the top and
Oh,
it says
okay.
ACLU on the bottom. It says, I read banned books.
Okay, this team will pick one. I love this. If this is a thing that comes from us, from this
Yes.
community, that
And we hashtag HSM SDC. Is that the right one?
because you know what I will do? I will tell Heather
Oh, yeah.
and it will get out there. But before I do that, I'll wait for us to decide.
And could we send like a bag of them to somebody like AOC's office or somebody's office to distribute to every member of Congress?
We will make a plan. We will find a pin, make a plan, blast it out into the world. And you're right, send some to people so they don't even have to.
I'll drive to DC and hand deliver them if I have to. It's only 90 minutes.
If we hand them to people so they don't even have to do anything, important people.
Yep.
Okay, I love this.
She lives in DC. She can do it. Nancy, are you on our Slack channel or? Okay.
Oh, I almost forgot, Carolee. Okay, so here's what happens now. I almost forgot the poof. Okay, so what's going to happen now? I got so wrapped up in the book
I
pin.
know.
So now we're going to go to the after party. What that means is that we will stop recording as we have been doing, because this will be posted online within the next few days. No recording so that we can be even freer and easier in our conversation than we were before. If you beamed in through the NCHE website, just stay right where you are and poof, you will be in the after party. If you are watching us from Facebook, you need to leave Facebook and join us at ncheteach.org/conversations. Go right to that place. You will be instantly part of the after party and our conversation can go in whatever direction we choose to have it go. Okay, everybody have a really good week and I will see in one way or another, hopefully all of you and more next week.
All right, John.